So I want to say thank you to everyone who's here. Excited to see you. My name is Jan Barker Alexander. I am the Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students for Pitzer. I've been here right at 3.5 months. And what I can say is the Pitzer way has been feeling right to me since I've been here. I want to thank you all for the opening, the welcoming, and for me from Louisiana to say that means something. For me to say that I have felt welcome here. Today, you are in for a treat. We are celebrating, as you saw on the flyers, we are celebrating not only in honor of Martin Luther King, but the civil rights movement. Our Division of Student Affairs, along with our supporters within the Melvin L. Oliver Racial Justice Initiative, Academic Affairs, the President's Office, we are here to honor those who have walked before us. Now today, you will have a chance to engage with two powerful women, two powerful writers. Now one of them, Anna, is a former student of mine. I have to be very open and honest. And so I'm going to try to get through this without shedding tears about seeing this mother of three, a 10-week-old? 12-week-old? 12 weeks. Wait till she sits down. You're going to be like, what? 12 weeks, okay? Be this intellectual powerhouse that I have been engaging with, this brilliance that I have been engaging with. I'd like to actually ask you all to go ahead and have a seat. But before we get started, I want to introduce our president, President Strom Thacker. President Thacker has decided that he wants to push a particular agenda this year, which is needed across higher education. And that is one of constructive dialogue. When you read the flyer, this said an intergenerational conversation. And I am Gen X. Anna is millennial. Okay. And B, Gen Z. And for those of you who are Gen X, I see Brad smiling. You know we talk a lot of smack, right? But what this is about is for us to also come into a conversation from our particular vantage points and viewpoints, and then be able to noodle on. We might land on still different spaces, but it's really about understanding. It is about engaging difference, it is about exploring difference, and it's about embracing difference. Embracing difference does not mean that you have taken on someone else's thoughts. It means that you understand that we can all agree to disagree. And I think you like to say agree to disagree agreeably. Right, that's President Thacker. So with that being said, I would like to bring President Thacker up to give some words about the initiative that we have going on here at Pitzer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, everybody, for coming. Another Gen Xer here, so it feels weird. It still feels like Gen X was the youngest, and now we've got at least two after us, so time flies when you're having fun. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you especially to Jan for organizing this event. I'm really excited about it. Now, as Jen mentioned, we're holding this really kind of under the auspices of two presidential initiatives. Melvin Oliver's Racial Justice Initiative, that really uses curricular and systemic innovations to address racial justice issues. This began in 2020 around the George Floyd murder, but not limited to that. And then my new initiative around constructive dialogues. And as Jen mentioned, the idea is that we are an educational institution. Our job, our mission is to create learning opportunities. So we're trying to create a vehicle where people can engage in productive, constructive conversations with each other, even when, and especially when, they might disagree with each other, because we'll learn more from those differences than we will from just being in a cocoon with those that we agree with constantly. And so this is kind of a nice hybrid event between these two things. And I'm really excited about it, and particularly because Anna's work fits both of them so perfectly, I think. And so I'm really appreciative of that. But her work helps us pull together people not by erasing their differences, but as Jan mentioned, by embracing them. And in my view, perhaps even more importantly, learning from them. And so not pretending that there are differences among all of us, but naming them, talking about them, exploring them, engaging them in a respectful way that sort of elevates the conversation and helps us learn more from it. So I'm hoping that through this conversation and further dialogues, we can learn more about race, about gender, about society, and also about each other. And I think those will be mutually self-reinforcing endeavors and tasks. We also have another event next week around the Constructive Dialogues Initiative that you'll find it in your email inbox, but I don't want to distract from the current one. So I'm going to next just introduce each of our speakers briefly, and especially Anna, in a little bit more detail so that you can learn more about her, and then we'll move right on to the panel from there. One thing, I just love these small world moments. Anna and I met each other just a few minutes ago, and she's close friends with the neighbors across the street from me here in Claremont, which just blew my mind because those people are from Indiana. And she said, yeah, I went to boarding school in Indiana, and I met them there. It's just a wonderful small world. And Anna, of course, well, I didn't mention this to you, but you went to college in my hometown. So I grew up on Stanford campus, Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, and then finally Palo Alto. So we share a stomping ground to a degree as well. And another one also, because she's got a long list of them. So she's a New York Times, Anna Malaika Tubbs is a New York Times bestselling author, advocate, and educator who grew up in, here's a long list, Dubai, Mexico, where I've spent some time, Sweden, Estonia, Azerbaijan, and the United States. She was influenced by her exposure to all kinds of cultures and beliefs, and is inspired to bring people together through the celebration of difference. Motivated by her mother's work advocating for women's and children's rights around the world, she uses an intersectional lens to advocate for women of color and to educate others. During her time as an undergraduate student at Stanford, where she worked with Jan, Anna took from what she'd seen in her parents' work and began honing her own identity as an activist. She served as president of Stanford's Black Student Union and was also the executive director of Stanford's Alternative Spring Break. In these roles, she organized rallies and events focused on the concerns of the Black community, fundraised money for women's clinics in the Bay Area, and grew her passion for advocacy and social justice. If I may say so, this is a very Pitzer-y story. Even some of the terminology is the same here as it is there, so it feels very, very at home to many of us. Anna holds a master's in multidisciplinary gender studies and a PhD in sociology from the University of Cambridge, in addition to her bachelor's in medical anthropology from Stanford. Her academic focus addresses gender and race issues in the United States, especially the pervasive erasure of Black women. Please join me in welcoming to the stage for this intergenerational conversation about the book, The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. Anna Malaika Tubbs, New York Times bestselling author, advocate, educator, mother. B. Joyner, Pitzer student from the class of 2025 and a double major in Africana Studies and Sociology from Chicago, Illinois. And Jan Barker-Alexander, Pitzer's Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. Thank you for joining us.
So we may or may not need these. I don't know if everyone can hear us. Oh, we need them? Okay, we do, okay. Oh, yes, that's right. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Testing.
Testing,
Yeah.
testing.
Is mine on? Oh, yeah. There it is.
So Anna,
Yes, Jan.
Strom read quite a few things that you did while you were at Stanford. I see a number of students. I'm so excited to see so many students here today. I'm so excited to see you here today. Could you give a sense of some of the things that you did and what they meant towards your trajectory to where you are right now?
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful to see all of you. Thank you for such a kind introduction. It's so great to be on this beautiful campus. And I took my 3 kids to the neighbor's house that we were just talking about. That's where they're hanging out. But yeah, in terms of the things that I did at Stanford and my undergraduate years were really revolutionary for me in a lot of ways. I'd spent most of my life in these other places, and there weren't a lot of Black people there, a lot of Black American people there. Where I went to boarding school in Indiana, there were maybe 2 other Black students there. And so when I went to Stanford, and even before I attended, when I was there for Admit Weekend, I heard this incredible speech, the most powerful speech that stuck with me, and it sticks with many students who visit Stanford's campus. And it's when Jan welcomes the class of admits and tells us how we are here as a part of a legacy of Black excellence. And I won't do the whole spiel. You should have her do it for you sometime. It's really incredible. But I felt this calling that I needed to be on that campus, and I needed to be a part of that legacy, something that for so many years I felt I wasn't a part of. I had kind of fallen for this kind of trick of that the Black community is monolithic and this just means one thing, and that I wasn't a part of that thing somehow. And later realizing when I did get on campus that our beautiful diaspora was something I was very much a part of. And so that's why I kind of went full force by my sophomore year and was like, now I'm the president of Black Student Union. And so I just realized there that there was all of these ways in which people were trying to divide us, obviously trying to oppress us, trying to keep us from understanding our uniqueness, understanding our history. And I felt very angry about that and the need to do something about it. And so I spent those years in undergrad really trying to do my own part and to learn as much as I possibly could. But I also knew, as much as I loved school, as much as I wanted to get a PhD, I didn't necessarily want to do it to become a professor immediately. There was something else I wanted to do with it, and it took me a while to figure that out. By my junior year, though, I had this title of public intellectual in my brain because of people like Melissa Harris Perry and Mark Lamont Hill, and realizing that I could do something with this tool of education beyond me, beyond my own work. I could speak to many different people across the world. And because I grew up in all of these different places, it just felt like the right fit for me. That I wasn't doing it just to produce more knowledge for the ivory tower, but to make things that seemed so complicated seem a lot more approachable and welcoming of everybody into the conversation. Without it erasing, again, the importance and the kind of radical nature of our movements, but it being so proud and unapologetic and saying, I want more people to talk about this. So all of that really started as an undergrad, where I started to feel very confident in my ability to be somebody who was kind of going to join these other national and international voices.
I am blown away just by that little bit that she just shared, and I heard some amens happening with the freshmen that were right here.
I love it. This is a really good crew right here.
So here's a question I have for you. What did you want to, I think I remember, but what did you want to major in when you got there, and what did you actually graduate in, and your honors thesis, and your dissertation, like topics?
Ooh, yeah, okay, that's going to be a long answer. I babbled, you're going to have to keep me back. But I started wanting, I didn't know what I wanted, but my dad, I'll start there. My dad wanted me to major in, pre-med. And a lot of this, everyone know. A lot of this is really, a result of my dad is Ghanaian. He was an immigrant, first to Sweden, then to the United States. And he was clear on kind of these paths that were guaranteed in terms of success. And this is what you study. You become they were lawyers. Both my parents were lawyers. You are a lawyer or you become a doctor. And I'm sure many of us have kind of heard these narratives. And my mom, on the other hand, though, she was always very open to me doing kind of whatever I wanted, and kind of knowing that I would work my hardest and be the best at whatever I did. So she was less, you need to do this particular path. And so she said, hey, you might want to do anthropology. That's something that's all about culture, and you've always been really great at observing differences across cultures and kind of celebrating those things. And so my mom was the first to say, try anthropology. And so I tried to merge it. I've always been like a peacemaker, and I did medical anthropology and took my first medical anthropology class as a freshman. And that really led me down this path. I decided on my thesis topic, which was sex education and anti-feminist socialization of American youth, because I started to realize that what we were learning in our different cultures and our different spaces, but especially in the United States, was that our bodies in some way needed to be policed, especially if we were women and especially if we were women of color. And I was really curious about that connection to the war on women nationally. And the fact that so many of my peers were the most impacted by George W. Bush's policies that were abstinence only, obviously very, well, now they don't seem quite as behind now that we've had Donald Trump, but at the time, he felt like the worst. So that was my research in undergrad. Then I wanted to know more about differences, not only between men and women, which was kind of the initial state of like this, feminist feminism that is really archaic, but more so, again, intersectionality. And so I did my master's in multidisciplinary gender studies and started focusing on Black feminism more specifically, and taught high school students Black feminist works and books to make this kind of a culturally relevant approach to high school education. And the final thing, my dissertation, is the same topic as my book, The Three Mothers, about the mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And their names are Alberta King, Louise Little, and Bertus Baldwin.
So the one thing that I can say from that, you cannot go teach in Florida. They will not let you come in the
I don't want to
entire
go to
state.
Florida.
Okay. So
I'm sorry if anyone's from
B,
Florida, but I don't want to go there.
B, I actually want to get just a reaction from you to what you just heard, because I feel like I've had a chance to experience the things that you're interested in. And sort of how does any of that resonate with you before we really get into this conversation around the three mothers?
I heard you mention gender studies and a lot of your works surrounding Black feminism. And this sort of brings me to a conversation that I had recently in my class. It's called Research Methods for Africana Studies. Yeah, Karis, right in the front. My professor, Jessica Finley, she was just saying how, what is Black research for, or who is it for? And I really begged the question of like, who is it not for, and what communities are not being really represented by the work that we have produced so far. And that part just really struck me, that you're teaching high schoolers about Black feminism, because like these are things that I wasn't really introduced to until I got to college. And it just reminds me of the populations of people who don't have that type of like narrative being pushed in schools. These are like things that are not talked about at all in high schools, at all in 9 through 12. So it's just kind of like, who are we? Who is the information for, number one? And how do we distribute the information for everyone? And how do we make sure their voices are included?
Can I answer? Oh. Were you going to say something? Okay. I love that question. First and foremost, really believe that at younger ages, we have to have these conversations. And it's really backwards, especially where we are right now, where students at young ages have access to their phones and to social media, and they're seeing everything, right? We know that some of the youngest victims of the things we're talking about have been children, when we're thinking about Trayvon Martin, for instance. And how are we going to have our children going out into the world and then saying, but they're too young to be exposed to the tools that will help them survive this? So that didn't make any sense to me. And I wanted to make sure that in these kind of earlier settings, and I had students as young as 8th graders, that they were not only exposed to what was happening nationally and internationally, but that they also knew they were not alone in this fight. That's a part of that power of knowledge. All of these people who have come before you, what do you need to know to be equipped? What do you need to know to protect your mind from all of the different images that you're going to see and the different messages that you're going to receive? And one of the books that really inspired me was Margot Lee Shetterly's book, Hidden Figures. And of course, it went on to become this incredible film, and Margot Lee Shetterly is the author of the original book. And it inspired me because, again, I was really angry about the fact that this was the first time I was hearing the stories of these Black women. And it became clear how strategic it was to erase them from our national and international knowledge. And so I wanted to also contribute to this, this fighting of the erasure. And so when I started my PhD, I was really trying to follow in her footsteps, because she did something where she produced work that was so well researched, so beautifully put together, and also was very accessible to a wide range of audience members. And the final thing I'll say about that point that you made about who our writing is for, one of the reasons I went with Macmillan, my publisher, is that the editor so you kind of go on an auction sometimes with your books, and so whoever's interested might bid on the book. And one of the editors called me and said, "Who do you think this book is for? Who should be the people who read this book?" And I said, anyone who's ever had a mother or maternal figure, in my opinion. And she said, exactly, that's exactly what I think too. I don't want this to be a book that we think is solely for only Black women are going to read it. But she believed that everybody was going to want to read this book. And not every editor said that to me. A lot of editors were trying to, I think, limit the capacity. And that's not to say that if it were only Black women who were reading it, that it would be limited. In fact, we know the power of Black women and what we buy. We have incredible power in that sphere. But it was more so to say, I want everybody else to understand the power of Black women. Black women, we already know it. So that's not necessarily who I need to have read this book. If Black women read it, I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel celebrated. I want them to feel proud of everything we've accomplished. For everybody else, it's for them to catch up and feel that same level of pride and same level of celebration, and to give us the credit that we deserve.
I think those snaps on this.
Thank you.
So I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you all now, and I have something, I don't know if it's really an admission, but this is the reality. I was born in 1966. I know black doesn't crack, I know. Y'all didn't know, you didn't know. I never, growing up in a small country town, Franklinton, Louisiana, I never thought I couldn't achieve anything because I was a girl. I only thought my race would be the one thing to hold me back. The women in front of me were powerful Black women, because I'm coming on the edge, back end of segregation. So I went to integrated spaces, but life was segregated. So I saw tall, statuesque principals that were women. I saw people leading that were women. Now, in partnership with their husbands. I also had a mother that I firmly believe was the original poster of Don't Let the Light Skin Fool You, okay? I really do believe that, because she had a genteel way about her, not in the Southern way that's offensive, but she had a way of being able to disarm people but still get her point across. So when I hear you all talk freely and openly and have so much banter about gender, about what we need to see, and then I look at, and I think you and I were talking about this earlier when we were talking about the generations, that for me, sometimes being of this generation, my concern ends up being the lack of appreciation for that narrative that I just gave. My mother actually, I don't know if you guys know what boxers are, boxer underwear, right? Okay. I mean, I'm just checking. And these were, I guess the cloth would have been cotton. My mother ironed my father's boxers. I never saw my mother have a subservient day to my father. And so for me, it's about the respect and appreciation of and before, and the assumptions that I think I make as B and I have been talking about how the generations, we need to talk and not judge, right? The critique sometimes feels that it comes without appreciation. And you know what? In our conversation, she is the one that did that therapy on me about the critique sometimes feels that it comes without appreciation. So Anna, what are your thoughts about what I just said?
There's so much to be said about that. I agree that we have to be able to appreciate the differences, and thinking through something that you were saying around your mom makes me think of this conversation around respectability politics, for instance, and how if we don't really understand the context or the history of respectability politics, it's very easy for us to say, oh, that's always wrong, right? We shouldn't have to act a certain way and assimilate in a certain way in order to be accepted as human beings in the United States. That's true. That's a true sentiment. However, if we study what happened throughout American history and this division of trying to push Black people generally outside of being men, women, human, there was this desire to reclaim our humanity by aligning ourselves with the dictates of what it meant to be human, which is very patriarchal. So this is actually something I'm writing about in my next book, the problems with obviously patriarchy, but American patriarchy very specifically, where it's not only about this gender divide, but it's also always intersecting with racism in the United States. It's always intersecting with homophobia. So these aren't different things. American patriarchy encompasses all of it. But if we're thinking about Black women being told, you are not women and your children are not children, but instead they're somebody else's property, they're somebody else's commodity, how Black mothers are the only ones throughout American history who were told that by law our children were not human beings, then why we also see Black women being so proud to be mothers, being so proud to have many children, being so proud to keep their marriages together, because for so many years that was completely degraded, completely torn apart. And that really, in a lot of ways, is the beginning of what becomes respectability politics. And so that's just an example of something that we can't fully just critique without showing some appreciation for where it came from, while also giving the validation to what my generation would say, which is I don't have to act in all of these ways in order for you to see me as a human being. But we can't get to that without that initial step. And even with the three mothers who I write about, all of them being so proud of having large families, because for so long that was robbed from Black women. And so you actually see a very different relationship with motherhood in Black feminism than you would with kind of traditional white feminism, for example. So those are just some thoughts.
And I would just like to add from I guess Gen Z perspective, there is, I feel this level of deconstructing that we're doing surrounding what we consider to be gender. Like what is masculinity, what is femininity? Why do we have to exist in one way? Why can't we exist on a spectrum? So there is new context, new things added with the new generations that come out. Like the next generation, I don't know what they're gonna do, but it's probably gonna be very different from what we do. So it's just we live in a certain context, and I feel like it's imperative to really understand the exactly what Anna was saying, the appreciation that Gen X and baby boomers and what was the root of why they wanted to present in certain ways, why they wanted to have a mother-father household with kids that are educated. Like, these are things that were not being presented for us. Like, we didn't have that representation. So we need that representation. They're gonna make it, you know? So it's just like, over time, that breakdown, it really does matter, and there should be appreciation for that.
Everyone heard that. There should be appreciation. I appreciate that from you, B. I have been enjoying getting to know B and the challenging conversation that we've been having. And we were talking about writing, right? So I've got this book, this writer, and be very clear, this writer sitting over here as well. So Anna, when we talk about the writing process, understanding your challenges, influences, and, you know, sort of thinking about the technical nature of what you do, you were able to structure something in a way that doesn't seem how people usually do this kind of writing, right? And so, B, you and I were talking about this, so share sort of what you were thinking around this.
Yeah, I was saying, like, in many historical biographies, narratives are often like presented individually, focusing on like one figure at a time. But we noticed, like, in this story, we have Alberta, Luis, and Bertis interwoven. All of their stories are told at the same time. And we just wondered, like, what prompted you to take this approach? And what made you go against, like, assigning separate sections for these individuals?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I want to say first that throughout my academic career, I was often told that I wrote in ways that were, quote, too understandable.
Okay.
Because in academia, there's a lot of performance. There's a lot of jargon, you know, which I completely stand against. I don't think it's necessary. If people can't understand you outside of your discipline, then I'm not exactly sure what you're doing. But like, a lot of the professors like, don't tell them that. So yes, throughout undergrad and in my master's and in my PhD, I was often hearing that. But my PhD advisor was very excited. She read my first draft of the dissertation, and they're very different. The dissertation and the book are very different. I will say that. I do have to do a little bit of, you know, playing the game of being very theoretical, but still, even when you read it, it's much more creative than a lot of other dissertations. And so my PhD advisor really stands out to me. She's one of the only Black and Latina professors at Cambridge, right? If you think like there's PWIs in the US, England is the OGs of that. But she was so excited. She called me and said, I have never enjoyed reading a draft more than I have in your writing. And she also said, I also know there's going to be a lot of people who say this is not academic enough. And so we're going to be very strategic about who we put on your committee. So that's just one thing. So even in the dissertation, I was very clear that I want my writing to be accessible. I had to know going into my PhD, kind of keep this goal in mind that I had of like public intellectual, like I want to be able to be understood by many different groups of people in different ages. And so with the book writing, I was able to be even more creative. I'm able to add more emotion in there. I'm able to talk about the things I imagine happening for the women, because there's times where I don't know exactly what was happening, but I'm trying to kind of go on this journey with them. And while I was doing the research, I found myself expecting my firstborn. And so it also felt like the beginning, and it didn't feel like it was the beginning of my own motherhood journey, and they were guiding me through my motherhood. And so I wanted to tell their stories in an interwoven way, because all three of them were born within 6 years of each other. And then their famous sons were all born within 5 years of each other. And this fact really excited me, because I didn't want to reduce their stories, because so often Black women are not represented, but if we are, it's as if, again, we are a monolith, as if one thing applies to all of us. And so in telling their three stories together, I didn't want it to seem like I was blending them, but instead focusing on how these different years in American history are impacting each of them sometimes very differently, because of their backgrounds, because of their levels of education, because of their access to resources. And so on every chapter, you can see how each of them are kind of moving through American history, moving through things like each World War, the Great Depression. And then you better understand why they teach their sons what they teach them. You better understand why, MLK Jr. has more comfort with a nonviolent approach. He came from a very privileged background. And if you don't really understand who his mother was, if you don't understand what it means that all of her family went to Morehouse and all of the women in her family go to Spelman, then you don't really understand how MLK Jr. becomes so well educated and so well connected. And if you don't know that Bertus Baldwin doesn't have the same access to resources, but she's a writer and she's just very creative and she believes in the power of words, then you don't fully appreciate what James Baldwin accomplishes at every single one of his schools, where he's one of the poorest students, but he's also the smartest. And you have all of this writing where they say he's smarter than the teachers, and how is this possible when he's so poor, and all of these questions. And so this is one of the reasons I wrote it in that way, because in every chapter you kind of flip back and forth and you're starting to understand American history through the eyes of Black women and understanding the rich differences within our group of Black women and the strength of that, and the balance of all of their different approaches, because we're so often told when we're talking about civil rights that there's only one way. And that we have to celebrate this one way over and over again. But in fact, there's many different approaches. And it's not only that Malcolm X and MLK are opposites. They were not opposites in any way. There was actually a lot that they agreed upon. And so by introducing that third person, a lot of people ask me, why did I introduce Bertus Baldwin? The other two kind of made sense together naturally. Introducing that third allows us to see the spectrum of identity. And so at every page, I'm trying to really celebrate those differences, really celebrate the ways in which they are seeing things differently, but then also how painfully similar their experiences become because they're Black women in America. So that was part of the strategy there.
So I know erasure is a big thing, right? And that we're not there, and that's really the driving force for you. Are there any moments that you felt a lot of pressure in writing the book because of the erasure, and I just better get this right?
A lot of pressure. The fact that nobody else had thought of this book before me, first was very shocking to me. A lot of people say, it's such a creative thing that you thought of the mothers. Like, how'd you come up with this idea? And I'm like, it's not creative at all. I think it's horrible that in 2021, no one had written a book about or even asked a question about who these women were. That's shocking. Okay. And I say it in the TED Talk. I talk about how January 15th, we all just celebrated it, right? The day that MLK Jr. was born. And we all think about MLK Jr. as if MLK Jr. birthed himself. Like, who else was in that room on January 15th? So again, ridiculous. It's not creative at all. I went on my tangent. What did you ask me? Oh, the pressure. I'm back. The pressure. Yes. So I did feel a lot of pressure because I was going to be this first book about these three incredible women. And I also constantly felt driven by the fact that nobody knew their stories. And so, again, you're going to hear a lot about anger, because anger is a real driving force for Black women. I was angry. So every time that, we celebrated MLK Day and I went to visit MLK Jr.'s house where he was born, and nobody's talking about Alberta. And then we're thinking about Malcolm X and everyone's sharing these quotes and nobody's talking about his mother. And then everybody's celebrating James Baldwin, and James Baldwin was constantly quoting his mother, and nobody was talking about his mother. I was really, I felt that pressure. I felt the pressure to get it right. And not only to get it right, because I really am so proud of this book. I'm proud of my research. This is my original research. There was almost nothing out there about them. Like, this wasn't like you could just Google them and write the book. I did this work. I found their, birth certificates, their death certificates, their families' land deeds. I was interviewing their family members. I was traveling around the country, looking through letters and archives, and sometimes didn't find anything after a day of sifting through so many papers. But I did that. And then not only was it that I felt the pressure to get the book right, I felt pressure to make sure this book made it on a bestseller list, because that's where people finally know about your book, really. There's so many books that come out every year. And unfortunately, until it makes it on a list, a lot of people don't even hear about it. And so I felt so driven, not for my own name, but for these 3 women's faces to be seen. And I just couldn't rest until it happened.
I cried.
Thank you.
I know. KB. It's so much. It's so much. You know what? Let me ask this real quick. We talked about that pressure. Did you ever have, in your writing, did you have moments of sorrow or even mourning about the loss that you could not capture?
Yes. Always, constantly. The 2 books that really motivated me, I talked about Hidden Figures. The second one that I was trying to emulate was The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. If you haven't read it, it's incredible. She won the Pulitzer Prize for it. But they both were able to interview the people that they were writing about. So I'm saying these are my 2 examples of things I'm trying to emulate. And I can't interview these women. I'm a PhD student. I don't even know if their families are going to be willing to speak to me when I'm sending these letters out, when I'm doing this kind of research. And so, yeah, I felt all the time very sad that there was so much else that we would have known if somebody had asked this question before me. And again, they didn't actually pass away all that long ago. Alberta King was murdered in 1974, so she passes before her time, and we could get into that if you want to, or you could read the book. But in 1999, Bertis Baldwin passes away. So she and I actually overlapped in life. I was born in 92, but obviously at 7 years old, I'm not going to be the one asking those questions. And so I was really sad that we didn't document their lives better. And I often speak about each of our lives as kind of like this puzzle, right? And some lives are a puzzle that's put together and then is framed and waxed over and put on the walls of a museum, and everyone can come and look at it. And other puzzles, depending on your layers of oppression that you're facing, again, intersectionality, those puzzles may be kind of thrown away. Some pieces are burned, some are chewed on by the dog, and we just didn't appreciate that life while it was here. And then posthumously, you can't go back and appreciate it because we've scattered those pieces everywhere. And so I did my best to put those pieces together, but it's definitely not complete. And a lot of it is based off of what other people said about them, and a lot of it is based off of what men said about them. So one example, for instance, is with Alberta King. When MLK Jr. dies, when he's murdered, she hears about it on the radio. And in her husband's autobiography, he writes that she was so strong in that moment, and that she kind of focuses more on being there for her grandchildren, and she's just strong. He keeps describing her in this way. And for me, it almost felt kind of a little triggering. How often as Black women are we told we're so strong? And as if nothing is happening inside of us, as if somehow we are more than human. And it felt, that is a moment where I'm thinking, I want to be able to hold her. I want to be able to know what's going on for you. What would you need? Not what do you need to do for everybody else. And so, yeah, I always say if I could have interviewed them, what are the questions that I would have asked? I would have wanted to hear from their perspective, not from somebody who wrote, their husband wrote about them or what their son wrote about them. And that's beautiful too, because the sons and the husbands do give them a lot of credit. But yeah, what did they believe about their experiences?
This is in line with what you were struck by when I asked you the question. What were you struck by with, the reading this?
I literally said the exact same thing. I was just it's just, you see all of the research that's being done is literally through a third or fourth generation. This is not directly from the women that are being talked about. And it was really, really frustrating to me because they existed during a time where everybody was popping off. I feel like that's the best way to say it. Like, you got Garveyism, like that's Elijah Muhammad, like all of these people, influential like Black figures that we think of today, they're all like existing and like doing things at the same exact time. And that was something that really like is really frustrating, because like there's so much history lost simply because we don't have that equality. We don't have that, like, people looking at the stories of women. And this really kind of went into a different question that I had of, like, in many ways, like, society infantilizes the men who have experienced, like, different types of traumas, but describe women as resilient, as strong, as capable. And we really just wanted to, well, in our conversations we were talking about, like, how do we stop the sensationalization of Black women in media and bring back that humanity? Like, how do we come back to, like, a consensus that, hey, yeah, they went through this hard thing, but, like, let's not characterize them as just strong. Like, these are humans that also get hurt, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Where to begin on that? A big goal of mine is that, and it shouldn't be such a difficult goal to attain, but sadly, throughout American history, it has been, that Black women are not less than human, and they're not more than human, but that we are human. And this is, for some reason, very difficult for people to grasp, because you either often see us represented in very objectifying ways, where, again, we are either a monolith, we're all the exact same, or there's all these stereotypes to describe us, to blame us for what our society has done to us. And then you see that then kind of trickle even into Black communities, where Black men often also feel that Black women are responsible for emasculating them, or, you know, whatever else. Bell Hooks often spoke about this. And then on the other hand, when people start to, quote, appreciate Black women, they start to talk about us as so strong and able to withstand more than other people, and somehow can hold more pain than other people. And so then you see that play a role even in the Black maternal health crisis, where people don't believe Black women when they say, I'm hurting. Something's wrong with me. And it's because we're not represented as human. Like, that is what we want to be, and that's what we want to be seen as. And so in this book, and on every page of this book, I'm trying to get us to all see us as human. And the different experiences. Yes, there's going to be a lot that they go through in the book. One of the tragedies that we know of this book is that all of the women, sorry, I've been like kind of ignoring you all, I'm sorry, let me turn this way. That all of the women are going to outlive their sons. We know this already, because this is, you know, American history. And so I want us to know that at the beginning, but walk through it still remembering the humanity of these women, remembering the feeling of them expecting their child, the feeling of them raising that child. And you know what? Even go further back, the feeling of them dreaming of who they wanted to be when they were young girls, when they were teenagers, before they get married, before they have children. And then who they continue to be even after these tragic moments happen. And for us to feel that tragedy in a way that we've often forgotten and have become numb to, because, again, it becomes a historical fact. MLK Jr. was murdered. We just kind of can say it. Versus what this was for this mother. She lost her son. These are human beings. And so that is really, I mean, a lot of people tell me they cry when they read the book, and I think it's probably because they're expecting to kind of feel like, oh, we're just kind of walking through, you know, American history, and yeah, right, bad things happen to Black people. No, imagine this, being a little girl when the Atlanta race riots happen and people are coming down and burning your streets. That's where we need to be in order to see Black women as humans.
I was struck by how vivid this was for me, for sure, because my parents lived this. my father's life was threatened by the Ku Klux Klan. I know of people who someone's grandfather got lynched. So this was vivid. The way that you wrote it, it really spoke to my soul. And when I thought about trauma, we talked about trauma earlier, and how trauma is passed down, right? And when you think of, I think it's Malcolm X, 4 of the 6, something about the brothers or the relatives, I might be getting something confused, but the trauma of knowing that you've seen someone get shot, knowing that you have also heard about what happened to Mr. Joe around the corner, all of this, and it can happen to you at any day, and not just to you, but to your mother too, right? And how do we deal with that trauma when we don't have ways to deal with that trauma except be strong? Except be strong. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think about voting. We were talking about that earlier, about voting and the pressure, not being able to, safety around actually trying to. We could actually make that a conversation now, which is sad, right? But safety in doing that. And there was something when you talked about the history and talking about having to take a test to vote. And I have 2 uncles who are political scientists. And when Uncle LJ was at Stanford, he would start all of his classes off and have students take a test. And they would be like, oh my God, why are we having a test on the first day? And it was the same test that he took to vote. He took a test to vote from a white man who could not read, because my uncle, in his pettiness, decided he was going to do some intellectual jousting with the person and start going back and asking him questions. And he knew that he didn't know anything, but yet this person, my uncle, had to take a test to vote. This is vivid. This is real. You can touch it. And as you were touching it, what was that moment that actually brought you to tears?
I cried a lot while writing this book, especially because while I'm writing it, I'm feeling my son kicking inside of me, right? And writing about, the atrocities that they were facing, and I purposely am always bringing in their contemporaries, right? What could have happened to these 3 mothers, because it's constantly also happening to women around them, and not far from them. And so in those moments, it was very sometimes difficult for me to get through it, because I didn't want to imagine myself. But at the same time, I very purposefully titled every chapter with our, right? So it's as if we're walking through it with them. So the circumstances of our birth. And then when I got to the chapter titled, one of them is titled Loving Our Sons, and the chapter right after it is titled Losing Our Sons. Mm-hmm. I really, on that chapter, wanted to be like, I don't even want to touch that. But then it also felt like I really had to. I wanted people to go there, like we were just talking about. I want us to feel like we're there with them because of the seriousness of what this is. And the sadness of our country becoming so comfortable with that. So comfortable with only hearing Black mothers' stories when they've lost one of their children. That's really most of the media representation of Black mothers. And so we become really numb to the pain of Black mothers instead of also appreciating these really loving moments. So I also had a lot of happy tears too. Mm-hmm. It felt that in researching them, I often say that they were kind of welcoming me into motherhood, that they were sort of reminding me that I couldn't allow the joy and the magic of motherhood to be robbed from me. knowing what I knew about becoming a Black mother in the US, knowing the statistics, being really afraid, seeing the history, seeing the parallels of what was happening. For instance, when I started writing the book, George Floyd was still alive. In the middle of writing this book, this is happening. I'm constantly having to go back and update the things that I'm saying because they're happening in real time. They were reminding me that what I was fighting for was to feel the joy and the magic of who I was as a Black woman and who I was bringing into this world. And that's what, I'm getting emotional talking about it. That's what they do constantly. It's not that they're only focused on the pain, but instead there's moments where they're just gardening with their kids. And there's moments where they're just sitting at a family meal and elders are over and they're just talking about life. And there were these strategies that they were teaching me to hold on to the joy and hold on to the magic while being fully aware of what we were up against.
So with that, do you have anything else you'd like to ask? I know you're like, oh my God, I have so much. Please share.
Yeah, that was definitely a more heavier section. Like losing our sons, I was just kind of like, dang, we are existing in a world where we're supposed to find joy in this. Like we're supposed to find joy in existing in a world where we can die tomorrow. Like, but based off of circumstances that we're trying to control, but sometimes it feels like it's very much so like out of our control. Yeah, I did want to shift gears.
And then we're going to open up for a question and answer from the audience. And I'll wrap it up, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I read your Washington Post talk, and I wanted to ask, when writing about these women, you learned that motherhood was not just an act of selflessness, but also an act of power in instilling values in a new generation, a generation that you aid in creating. What values might you say you're instilling in your own children that might change the world?
Okay, wow. I love it. I told them not to send me any questions ahead of time because I like not knowing what's coming. And this is why.
Exactly.
These
This
are
is
great questions.
why. Yes.
There's so much to be said about that. I'll first say one of the things that, as much as I celebrated how different each of these women were from each other, one of the unifying things is what I call these tenets of Black motherhood that I realized in all three of them and saw in so many other Black maternal figures around me. The first one is that we as mothers of Black children don't have a choice as to whether or not we're going to tell them about how horrible the world can be. That's like a privilege if you have that choice, because we don't have it. We have to prepare them. They're going to come up against it at some point. But the second part of that is that our children cannot be defined by that. And we have to teach them that the world can be very ugly. There's going to be a lot of people who have a very myopic vision of you and your potential, but you cannot be defined by that. And thirdly, showing them ways to fight against that, showing them what they have done in their own lives. You know, Alberta King being somebody who participated in marches and in boycotts and who believed her education was a tool for something larger. Louise Little being radical, standing up against white mobs, literally, and risking her life in doing so, but saying that no matter what, you have to fight for yourself. It's better to die living free than to live oppressed. This is her perspective. And Bertus Baldwin saying that her activism is in the way she loves her children, that is the biggest change that she can make, is making sure they know their worth and their value based off of how their mother treats them, and that they go and demand that everywhere else that they enter and travel to. And that the fourth part of that is going back to what I was saying earlier, which is remembering that at the core of all of this is holding on to our joy, holding on to our humanity, and knowing that we're a part of this kind of larger team of people who are doing that. And so my children are very young, very, very young. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 12-week-old. That's what Jan was saying earlier, my 12-week-old. And so there's a question for me and my husband, how early do all of these lessons begin? But it's never too early to focus on joy, on love, on me putting my work down because I just want to watch them experience life and kind of see things through their eyes. And it's never too early to instill in them a pride for who they are as Black children.
Well, that was a word, as we would say in the South. What I'd like to say right now is we were talking about mourning, and I asked you that about mourning, about their stories not being there and the pressure. But I also want you to know the joy that anyone that reads this book, they are no longer erased, Anna. They are there for us to be able to touch and to imagine and reimagine. And joy is what we want. Now, with that being said, we would like to open up for question and answer right now. And if you can stand, raise your hand. There we go. You got two right here. Okay.
Hi, my name is Teo. I was just curious, how do you fight Black excellence and still be successful, and like how do you humanize and still try to be great? So
The balance of all of it. That's interesting. I don't know if this is what you were asking, but it did bring this thought to my mind that we often are critical of Black people who achieve success, especially like monetary success, if they are activists, if they are, again, like for the people. And for me, and this might be an intergenerational thing that we can all kind of discuss, but for me, this is a part of this like strategy of oppression, to tell us that if we're going to do this kind of work, that we don't get to, that we have to suffer, that we don't get to enjoy certain privileges, that you have to seem or feel kind of, embarrassed of that somehow. And for me, I think it's a part of that revolution, like that financial power, and to all be very aware of that and to spend time thinking of like, how are we going to make money and like live joyfully and comfortably? I'm not trying to struggle. I don't want my children to struggle. I want to get paid for what I do. And being proud of that, Someone wants to hire me to give a talk, you better pay me for it. I've given a TED Talk, like who do you think this is? And being proud of yourself. And because other people will also look at me like, you're okay, I can tell they're sort of like, okay, young Black woman, And I'm like, I'm not going to fly there for that. So figure it out. And so I think that's one of the things, like you do have to find that balance, while also remembering what you're doing it for, and it's something larger than yourself. But like the generations of your family are larger than yourself, Like if I can build wealth for generations of my family, if my husband and I can be the first to do that for our family, awesome. That's great. And then the second part of it was, what was it? There were two other words you used. What were they?
Like how do you be successful and still fight to be seen as human?
Yeah, that's a good question. How are you successful and still fight to be seen as human? I think for me, that brings up thoughts for me of, there's also an opposite side of this. When you do reach a certain level of success and people are very demanding of you and your time, and kind of, I think, want to use you in a certain way. So I think maybe my husband might relate more to this because he was a politician for several years. But as he kind of climbed this ladder of success in politics, and he became the mayor of Stockton, California, and became the youngest mayor of a major city in American history, all of these people then started to make him, or wanted him to be like a puppet, wanted to tell him what to do. And he always said, that's not why I became a politician. I did it because it was something that I was called back to my city where I'm from. And it doesn't matter how successful I become, I'm never going to forget why I came here to begin with. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my question was, over the course of writing the book and tracking the lives and times of these historic women, were there any realizations or insights that you gained about your own femininity or Black femininity in general that were like maybe inspired by these women in terms of maternity, autonomy, humanity, just like things like that?
Okay, yeah, that's a small question. I'm just kidding. So much to say about that. I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is that we have to be very careful about what we cast on people in history. So this came up recently. It's a little pop culture moment when what's his name? Who talked about Megan? No, Megan Good being like Coretta Scott.
Oh no, Jonathan Majors.
Jonathan Majors. Anyways, but someone was interviewing me about this, like, what do you think about this, and why they said that, why did he say this? And I was like, here's the thing: we often think about people in history based off of what we're taught about like the world right now. So, man, all these things. And I often heard this in my own life, right? Again, I told you all a little bit about my husband. And people were saying things about me, like in articles, or they would say it to my face, like, you're the woman behind the great man. Like they would often do this. And I'd be like, huh? Don't call me that. I don't want to be behind. I'm not behind. I'm right beside him and often in front, leading. So don't call me the woman behind the great man. And I've started to realize it's just like we continue to like repeat these like cycles because we want to place them in that role. And in my research of these women, that was not them at all. Alberta, and I'll talk just a little bit about her and each of them. I'll give an example of how that was not them. Because Alberta, even in her husband's autobiography, he'll tell you that he could not have become who he was without her. Now, a lot of people are going to say this about their partners, but like in this case, it's like real, it's beyond just like a nice thing to say. Because when he met her, she already, had a college degree. She's very well educated, okay? And we can't take that for granted. In the early 1900s, a Black woman, she has a college degree, she's getting a teaching certificate, she wants to become a teacher. And all of this goes along this line of what I was saying about her family and how they've been dedicated to their education for generations. Like she's like the Alberta Williams, okay? And when he meets her, he did not have the same access to resources that she did. He had moved to Atlanta looking for new opportunities. He was basically illiterate. And he falls in love with Alberta Williams. And all of his friends make fun of him, and he calls himself in his book a green country boy, and like how lucky and blessed he was that Alberta actually has some interest in him. And so then we go back through history and we're talking about, MLK Sr., and this was his church, and she's in the background. That's just not true. And so my biggest realization, going back to your question, is that we are describing people in history based off of often a very American patriarchal lens, and it's not exactly the role that they were playing. And so I hope kind of for myself, like you said, something I learned about myself is that as much as possible, I'm going to correct that narrative that people are trying to tell about me. And going back to that puzzle piece, I'm also going to be in charge of my story and get as much out there as possible so that people can go back and say, no, that was not what the role was that she wanted to play.
So these are the last. Do we have any in the back? Oh, right here? Okay. And then these will be the last two. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
So I had a question going back to a point that you had made about, first of all, curious just about like medical anthropology. But you made a point about connecting to Black maternal mortality rates, and that was making me think about this piece by Tressie McMillan Cottom called "Dying to Be Competent," where she talks about like forced incompetence of Black women and Black expectant mothers on basically people medical experts defining what they can and can't know about their bodies and telling them that they don't know anything about their bodies and their personal physical experiences. And so I'm kind of trying to tie that into this idea of being forced into incompetence about your own history and your own personal lived experiences outside of just like a physical experience. And I guess my question is like, what then does competence look like to you? I guess generally, and as an educator and someone who has like worked in sex education, how do we start reteaching competence, especially for young Black girls?
Heavy hitting questions. Yes, I love it. I love that y'all feel I'm here to play this heavy hitting game. I love it. Yeah. So I have so many thoughts that come up in each of these. I'm trying to distill them. A big thing about this like competency thing that you're talking about is that women in the U.S., but especially women of color, have been told to not trust themselves or to trust their intuition. And so a big part of like colonial mentality is white men are the experts and they know better in terms of everything. So when we're thinking about Black maternal mortality rates, largely these are attacks on female intuition, but especially where there's this rich history for Black women of like midwifery, for instance, and delivering outside of hospitals. And it was even illegal for us to deliver within hospitals up until Medicare becomes available and hospitals can make money off of our bodies. And therefore, then we're allowed to come in and the midwife is dirty and we're doing all of these things to kind of villainize a practice that is much more based on intuition. And women kind of taking claim of our body and saying, I know what I need, or I know what's going wrong. And so at every turn, you're seeing throughout American history, Black women very specifically being told, you don't know what you're doing, and you don't understand your own body, and you don't know how to parent, and you don't know how to do this, right? And you need to listen to an expert on this. And so much of my own work and in my own life is really reclaiming the power of my intuition. And there may be so much more that I'm going to learn, but at any given moment, I can give a pretty strong felt answer because I'm always thinking from a space of my intuition. And so quite often, people ask me questions about like parenting, and I say, my kids are so young, I'm probably gonna maybe have a different answer when they're a little older, but my intuition right now is X, Y, Z. And I think, especially for mothers in the US, it's been very strategic to rob us of that confidence. It's been strategic so that mothers don't really fully understand the power that they hold, so that they always have to be seeking somebody else's opinion of what they're doing, so that they can be blamed if something goes wrong, but then are never celebrated when it all goes right. So it's all about claiming, like I can do this. I know what I'm doing. And I'm not also gonna feel guilty if I make a mistake. I'm gonna have grace with myself. And so many of the conversations around mothers in the US is anti-feminine intuition. And it's something that I want more people to feel that they can step into.
Hello, my name is Raheem. Just to preface, one thing I really love about the beginning of your book is you start with an affirmation. So in the same way, I'd like to just say for all of us, like, we honor you and we appreciate you for the work you've done, because this is very magnificent.
Thank you. Make me cry.
This conversation has been very enlightening, but also very tough, especially when it's looked at not only an intergenerational perspective, but I also think an intercultural perspective, right? So I start thinking of my mother, who's from East Africa, from Tanzania, right, who came to America, right? And I know we talk a lot about this idea that Black women, for so long, they've had to be, as you said, more than human. They've had to be strong, right? And so one anecdote that I think of that, kind of encapsulate this is that me and my mother used to have a garden that we tended to get to together, right? And this was one of the few moments where we've been able to really express truths. And once we're outside of this space, I feel like there's kind of like that hardening again, right? There are many conversations that I've had with my father, right, where he's been very transparent and very informative about his past. He'd love to talk about his past, but I feel like in the terms of my mother, right, because of her just society and because of how she's had to grow up and because of how oppression plays a role in that intersectionality, she's not been able to share as much, right? And so I guess my question to you is, especially as Black men and as Black boys with our mothers, how do we kind of pierce that strength, right? And to get to that vulnerability, to have that honest conversation.
Wow. Yeah, clap for that question. That's such a beautiful question. I want to hear your answer on this too. It's a really rare thing that children see their parents as humans, really, honestly. If I go back through my own experiences, and I don't know, you just think that they're supposed to be some kind of perfect being. And yes, they are supposed to be, stable for us. Yes, we need them to not always show us all their anxieties and all their pains. But when you get to a point of this kind of realization and the gift that it is that you have that before you've lost a parent, it's something to really act upon. And it's asking questions of them, right? That are like you would ask a friend or just another human, and no longer seeing them on this like pedestal that you can't reach, but more so, even starting from the beginning, you could say, I want to write a biography about you, Mom. I want to know what drove you when you were a little kid. What did you dream of being? What were your favorite foods? Just those little things that somebody, especially their own child, has never thought to ask them. And just to share a little personal fact, my mom passed away 2 years ago. And it was after the book came out. But when the book came out, she said, I feel motivated to write my own story. I said, that's super cool. I love that. I'm so excited. She's like, will you edit it with me? And I said, yes, I love that you're going to have this memoir. And we didn't know that, it was a surprise that she passed away. And she left me this gift of her memoir. And it's so powerful for me to be able to go back and read from her perspective. And, sometimes like you might even disagree with the perspective, right? Because you're like, I don't remember that. I remember that going differently, But she's allowed to have her perspective. And that's a beautiful thing. And we so often don't give that to moms, especially. Dads can kind of, I'm not trying to be too general, but dads can kind of get away with whatever. There's a lot of this like dads get credit no matter what. Like for instance, with these three women that I write about, the dads, we'd heard their stories before. Like a lot of people had heard that MLK Sr. was a reverend, right? No one told us that he inherited his wife's church, okay? But fine. We'd heard that Malcolm X's dad was an activist. A lot of people knew this. We didn't know that he met his wife, who he had children with, because they were both Marcus Garvey followers. That's how they met each other. And even if the dad was horrible, we still heard about them. James Baldwin's stepfather, the reason we knew him because he was so abusive, but we still were like, his impact on his son. Versus the mother who was there every single day. There's always this question about the man. We're also like, ooh, tell me about the dad. Tell me. In my husband's own experience, his father has been incarcerated his whole life. And this is not, we can get into the horrible nature of the 3 strikes rule in California. However, his mother has been there with him day in and day out. And I can't tell you the amount of people who the first question is, tell us about your dad. So we need to, in our own lives especially, stop doing that. And look at your mom and sit down with her while you are still able to, especially, and say, what are the things that you are passionate about? What do you love? What did you love before? What changed? What's something that when I was born, was something that maybe was ignited in you, or was there something that you had to like put to the side for a little bit that you want to come back to? And that's really, you learn so much about yourself, because in so many ways you're carrying something forward, even if they aren't giving themselves the credit for it anymore. So much of what my mom dreamed of, I'm doing. And I didn't even know that was like a dream she had planted. So I'm getting emotional talking about it. But I love that question. And I hope more of us take that charge of really returning to our mothers the humanity, the recognition, and the celebration that they deserve.
This is our last question.
Oh, okay, well.
She had one, yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Sorry, I'm taking a little breath. I can't cry.
Take your time.
I really appreciate the conversation that we are having, especially looking back on, like, my family always calls our household a matriarch, because my mother she doesn't stand for anything. If she doesn't like something, she's going to tell you. She's a Southern woman. But I feel like it's too often that I feel like out of my siblings, I am the one that my mom is the most open with about her emotions. But I feel like from this conversation, I'm learning a lot about, instead of telling her to find peace, more so asking her how to do that. Especially my older sister recently just found out she's expecting. And she's very excited about it, and I always view her as my second mother. And I feel like she's on her journey of finding peace and all these things. So I told her about this talk, and she was like, you have to go, you need to go find out, you need to get a book, you need to be there first, all these different things. Like, she's very on it like that. And I guess my question is, in what ways did you see your peace and how you found it and grounded yourself in it before your motherhood shift to after your motherhood? Because I feel like that line is never talked about. That transition isn't talked about. And I feel like I know my mother's story very well, because it's a story of her having kids really young and her telling us about all of her struggles, but never how she got through them. It's just where she is now. So I'm interested in how that panned out for you, especially in writing this book. So yeah.
What a beautiful question. And a beautiful one to end on. I'm really grateful that I was doing this work before I became a mother myself, because my motherhood is inextricably intertwined with my knowledge around motherhood, and especially like in the United States, the attack on mothers, the lack of support for mothers in the US, right? I mean, we can talk about the policy, for instance, like no affordable childcare for everybody. We don't have guaranteed paid leave. Like, there's all these ways in which our nation says mothers just don't really matter, to be honest. Ways in which other countries are constantly affirming mothers, right? Really honoring that role. And so in becoming a mom while doing this work, I knew that my ability to recognize my worth and my power and my influence was the best way that I could combat this national message that I didn't matter. And my ability to remember who I am and see my motherhood not as an erasure of who I used to be, but instead an extension of who I am. And in researching these women, seeing so clearly the line between what they were passionate about, what they did in their own lives, and how they translate that into their motherhood. And that they couldn't be the mothers that they were without being the little girls that they used to be, brings me a lot of pride, and makes me really excited to show my kids the things that drive me. And not falling for this trap of us thanking mothers for all the sacrifices. Yes, motherhood comes with sacrifices, that's true. But the fact that we overemphasize the sacrificial part and we're constantly thanking mothers for putting themselves behind other people, like that's a compliment. Like, thanks so much for denying yourself for me. Like, what? Thanks so much for, all the things you gave up for me. Thank you. Stop thanking moms for that. How about ask us what are things that we would like, or what are things that we care about. And also thank us for keeping our passions alive. For something my mom, all the time she had to travel to all these different places, right, with her work. And there were times where, yes, she was apart from me, right? We had these moments where for like months, sometimes I wouldn't see her. And a lot of people would say, oh, that's horrible. Like other mothers of other kids would kind of judge her for this. But I always felt really driven. I felt like I know what it is to have something that you care so much about, that you're so dedicated to. And that doesn't have to be in this divide this arbitrary divide of like working moms versus non-working moms. All moms are working. There's no doubt about that. There is no work that is more demanding of like your brain and your creativity than motherhood. And moms who are there with their children can still show their children what they care deeply about, what they're passionate about. And we have to stop this erasure of the identity of who this person was before motherhood and see it more as, this growth of how can I apply all the things that I care so deeply about into this next part of a chapter that I maybe chose to take.
So with that note, we will give a round of applause. So what I would like to say right now is I really want to thank Strom for the support of this, all of my colleagues who are here, all of the students who are here, but I also want to end on this note when it comes to mothers. Mothers sometimes fall prey to critique because we are constantly critiqued about what we're not doing, and that makes us fall prey to sacrifice myself. And we didn't get to, because this is a very robust conversation, but we were going to talk concerning about mental health, right? And so what I would challenge you all to do with these great questions towards the end is not only to think about your own mental health, but think about your mother's mental health, your family's mental health, and the historic trauma that is in your family as you leave us today. I am beyond happy about this conversation today. I want to thank Ruet Foster, who is here. I know he's sitting here looking as a trustee. Glad to see you here. Also, we have a number of other people who have helped to make this possible. And I don't want to forget any names, but I'm looking at Alicia Diaz. I'm looking at Alan, who is also with the Racial Justice Initiative, that has also supported this and been in partnership with us. With that being said, we actually have a reception following. So we will now go out in the corridor, and I thought you were raising your hand. I'm sorry. We will now go out in the corridor and engage in more conversation. Thank you all so much.